Hi, everyone. I think we're just trying to get everyone through in the room here. If I can just get a thumbs up from the folks on this sidebar here to see whether we could get started now or whether we still need to wait. Are we good to go? Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Anna Serrano and I'm the President and Vice Chancellor at OCAD University. And I am thrilled to be welcoming you all here for this exciting conversation. We were just talking about it in the green room. But before I begin, I would like to first provide us all with a sort of a way for us to just reflect on where we're standing today. And so OCAD University acknowledges the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we stand and create. As we are online, we would also like to acknowledge the traditional territories many of you may also be listening from if you're not in Takaranto. So I know we're super looking forward to this conversation. Hear, see, feel, a conversation on the haptics of photography and the sonic. I love that description, so evocative. And this is between OCAD University's international resident curator, Dr. Bonaventure Ndikung, and Toronto's Liz Ikiriko, presented by On-Site Gallery at OCAD University. Lisa Deanne Smith, our curator of On-Site Gallery, will introduce them shortly. But I thought it would be important for all of you folks to know that the International Curatorial Residency Program at OCAD University is the largest of its kind in Canada. And this program stimulates curatorial research and excellence and culminates in an original exhibition at OCAD University's flagship professional exhibition space, On-Site Gallery. So look forward to what Bona will be providing us as an exhibition coming up shortly in the next few months or so, or a year. And all this would not happen without the support of our wonderful and generous partners. So On-Site and OCAD-U would like to thank and acknowledge the generosity of the International Curatorial Residency sponsor, none other than Partners in Art, as well as our supporters, the Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, and Nexus Investments. Thank you very much to you all. This is important work that you're doing, helping us to bring to this wonderful public here today. So now I'd like to pass things over to Lisa Deanne Smith, curator, On-Site Gallery, to introduce the speakers.
Thanks so much, Anna. Before I introduce the speakers, just a little housekeeping. If you're having difficulty with Zoom, you can also view this event on On-Site Gallery's YouTube page. Just do a quick Google and you'll find us easily. And also the chat function, well, we're going to be planning a Q&A. For now, the chat function will be closed for conversation, but the panelists will be using it to share links. So if you get a notification, there'll be a link there, but you can't respond to it. But if you do have questions, you can put them in the Q&A feature. So that's what we'll be using for Q&A at the end. I've been very inspired by the practices of both of our speakers. In thinking about the title, Hear, See, Feel, a conversation on the haptics of photography and the sonic, I interpret Hear, See, Feel as an invitation and a call to action. How do I hear, see, and feel photography? How do I hear, see, and feel the sonic? How do the producers and their collaborators hear, see, and feel their work? What are the important nuances that are glossed over when one sense, usually the visual, is prioritized over others? How is that echoed in the hierarchies established through colonialism? I'm so looking forward to listening today. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Born in Yaoundé, Cameroon, Dr. Bonaventure So Beijing Ndikung is an independent curator, author, and biotechnologist, and is the founder and artistic director of Savvy Contemporary Berlin. He was curator at large for Documenta 14 in Athens and Kassel, and guest curator of the 2018 Dakar Biennale in Senegal. Together with the Miracle Workers Collective, he was curator of the Finland Pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2019. Dr. Ndikung was artistic director of the 12th Rencontre de Bamako, a Biennale for African Photography 2019, and is artistic director of Sans Speak 2020 to 2024, a quadrennial contemporary art exhibition in Arnhem, the Netherlands. In January 2020, he will begin as the new director of the Huis der Culturen der Welt, HKW. He is currently a professor in the Spatial Strategies Master's Program at Weisen Sie Academy of Art in Berlin. He is OCAD University's first international resident curator and will create an exhibition for On-Site Gallery in fall 2020. Liz Ikiriko is a Toronto-based Nigerian-Canadian artist and curator. Her role as an educator, maker, and mother informs her practice, which focuses on African and diasporic narratives. Ikiriko holds an MFA in Criticism and Curatorial Practice from OCAD University for 2019. Her work has been shown nationally and is part of the permanent collection of the Dunlop Gallery. Her writing appears in upcoming Aperture's publication As We Rise, Public Journal, Mice Magazine, C Magazine, Backflash, and Akimbo. Ikiriko's most recent curatorial projects include Is Love a Synonym for Abolition? Gallery 44, 2020, that's on now. The Break, The Wake, The Hold, The Breath, Circuit Gallery Prefix ICA 2019, and A Lineage of Transgression, Artspace Peterborough 2019. She is co-curator of Bamako Encounters, the 13th African Photography Biennale, and is the curator of collections and contemporary engagement at the Art Gallery of York University. I'm going to pass it over to you for the conversation. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'd just like to thank OCADU, my alma mater, and On-Site Gallery for this opportunity. And I would like to thank Bonaventure for this invitation as well. I thought I would just briefly start by letting folks know Bona and I's connection. So I think there's so many things to to celebrate in your career, Bona, that maybe it was just missed there that you are also the artistic director of Bamako Encounters, the African Photography Biennial, upcoming at some point. And so I was honored to be invited by Bona to be one of the co-curators of the 13th edition of Bamako, which will be coming up soon. We have our curatorial advisor is Akimbode Kimbi, and our co-curators are Tandazani Dlatkama and Miriam Barada. And so I have had the honor of meeting with our team weekly and sharing many incredible conversations on photography, art, the sonic, video, performance, and thinking through I guess, just the different kinds of forms of engaging bodies on the continent and throughout the diaspora. We're all over the place. We're from Berlin, Cape Town, Marrakesh, and Toronto. So this has been such an incredible experience. And I think I'm really excited about our conversation today and to kind of continue some of the conversations we've had previously. So I thought maybe we could start by, I think when I'm thinking of the haptics of photography and the sonic, I'm thinking about deep listening, and I'm thinking about, I know that the influence of people like Akimbode can be is profound on a lot of us, and his perspectives on wandering and listening and really taking in city life, the rhythms, and observing space and time passing. And I guess maybe to start, Bona, I know that Bode's influence is heavy with you, and I see it also in the programming of Savvy. I see there's, you have listening sessions. There's so many different elements that I kind of see that respect for deep listening. So maybe could you speak to that?
First of all, I'm more than happy to be here and thankful for the possibility of doing this conversation with you, Liz. It's really a great pleasure, and when Francisco and the On-Site Gallery asked me about doing a talk in Toronto, the first thing that came up my mind was really to be in conversation with you. So I really very much appreciate this possibility, and is the friendship and the collegiality, if there's a word like that. So thank you very much for taking the time. And also a word of thanks again to the whole On-Site Gallery and OCAT teams, and to Anna for doing the opening. And I feel very much welcome within this whole setup, and it gives me great pleasure. It's the third talk I'm doing within a week, so it's been a lot, but it's always been fun. So I was also very happy to see the ideas that Liz proposed for the talk. It really. So I'm as excited as every other person in the audience, and truly because there are things that have accompanied me in the past at least 15 years of making exhibitions. So the haptics of photography and the idea of deep listening, and Akimbode Akimbi's practice as a photographer. So there are many things there. So I'll start with maybe the idea of deep listening, which one can take from, say, the thoughts and the writings of Pauline Oliveros, who wrote so beautifully about the active listening process, the listening beyond the surface, going, the profundity of listening, so to say, and which has been again, really something that has kept me thinking, not only within the space of the sonic, but beyond, because she said at some point that it is through the sonic that we will learn to situate ourselves in the world, so that again is something that I find very interesting. So what is that sonic? Is it just the what is audible, or is it the sonic beyond the audible? So is it the perceptive sonic, or is it just what goes through the ear? So is it the sonic that is the waves that we encounter in space. You see the sonic that has to do with the energies that we produce and that, you know, others feel. And that has been especially very important because whenever in the past decade and more in which I've been in conversation with somebody like Mbode Akimbi, something that has always come up, besides the fact that we both like music and so on and so forth, is that his understanding of photography or navigating spaces as somebody one can call a photographer, because I think he's a poet. Mm-hmm. There's a very close relation between poetry and photography in good, you know, in most of the cases. And what I've heard him say over the years is the listening, right? So he says he listens through space. He talks about the fact that, you know, last week I was in a conversation with him in Hamburg for the symposium Lucid Knowledge, which was set up by Koyoko and her team of brilliant curators. And we're talking about listening to the ground, you know, and listening became such an important way of seeing, which I've found very important in his work. Now, there is something there that, of course, it's not as if he's saying that, okay, when you look at my work, you're going to listen to some sound, but it's actually what pulls him, what keeps him away, what guides him, what are the pillars, you know, that kind of guide him through his practice as a photographer, you know, and that has really, you know, helped me in understanding not really what photography is, but what photography does, you know. So in this relationship between, you know, what is visible and what is audible, I would like to take us to something that Jacques Attali wrote in Noise, The Political Economy of Music in 1977, the year I was born. And he wrote that for 25 centuries, Western knowledge has tried to look upon the world. It has failed to understand that the world is not for the beholding, it's for the hearing. It is not legible, but audible. And this is something that I found very interesting. It's not just a challenging of the idea of sight or vision. It's proposing the fact that the world is actually more audible. We actually listen to things more than we see them, you know, and that challenge of the hegemony of the visual is something I've been interested in. So in terms of photography, how does one think of photography beyond the sense of sight, although it is said to be a visual medium, but actually think of photography through all the senses? So that's why I was super happy to have Liz propose this notion of the haptic and the listening and so on and so forth, because there's several things going on there. What actually provokes the photograph, so that's the one hand, and the other hand, what do we feel when we're in the presence of the photograph, you know?
Yeah, I think this is I'm so happy that, I'm sorry, I missed the name of the person that you mentioned, but the idea of not for the beholding.
Jacques Attali.
Jacques Attali. Because I think that there's something there that you're like, I'm wondering if there's kind of this connection or this relationship between our understanding through colonial capitalist systems, where watching, viewing becomes an extraction, where the formation of photography was, in that sense, one of taking. And so, thinking through deep listening, maybe what we're attending to is the connections, right? Like in terms of what happens when we actually are truly able to connect and have a sense of the audible or the haptic qualities of photography, when the goal, the focus, and the premise is not to take, is not to extract. And I think that really makes this connection with the poetic as well, right? Like that there's, and I think Akambode is a poet, and I think that it is that observation where it's about being alongside, being in relation with, as opposed to taking, consuming, presenting to sell, or to know. Maybe there's something about knowledge, like knowledge consumption that is counter to what artists like Akambode are doing, that is so profound, and that does kind of jump out when you see it. I also think about, I was thinking about a Canadian documentary filmmaker who's Indigenous Abenaki, Alani Sabomsawin, who's, just had an incredible career and continues to make films. And I think has probably been making films for the last 50 years, maybe 60. I've seen her speak numerous times, and almost every time, I think one of the most amazing things she talks about is that when she's making her documentary films, she spends possibly just as much time listening to the stories without a camera, with no team, just being able to kind of be with the people that she's documenting. And that kind of relationship and the space that she creates by sharing without expectation, I think that's alongside that sense of making sure this isn't an extraction practice. This isn't a situation where I'm looking for you to give me your everything. Really stands out in terms of, I think there's something about, like when I was thinking about Akambode, it just came up, this idea of the presence that Alanis has in relation. And I think they're both poets. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So several things there. Of course, the history of photography has been also a history of extractivism. So people going to different parts of the world, or even where they are, and taking images of others without their consent.
Mm-hmm.
And as if that was not enough, framing them within a structure of the other, framing them within structures of epistemic violences, framing them, dehumanizing them, so to say. So there is a very long history of that, which is indeed also the history of photography. So we cannot forget that. So vision and its documentation, which is in many cases the photograph or the image, has to do a lot with stigma. So stigma, and if we get into the etymology of the word, the stigmat, the mark, the brand, has to do also with the mark that is left, the scar that is left. So that dehumanization, that violent stays as a stigma in photography and in the imagery of certain peoples in the world. So the question is then how to deal with that, you know. In the text I wrote for the last edition of the Bamako Biennial, which the subtitle was What Does Photography Do? I think what I was trying to do there was to think about the practice of photography, you know, and what it has surmounted to. And in that text, I referred to a text that was written by Okwenwenzo, in which he talked about the photographing or the image making by Europeans, or, you know, say white folks, of African peoples. And he talked about the ethnographic, the exotic, and the erotic, you know. And I was very much interested in reflecting on that, you know, and how these three E's kind of create this stigma. So the question then becomes, what does one do with this? How does one you know, tackle this legacy of photography? And I'm really happy you brought in this example of Alanis and the act of listening, you know, and sharing, you know, that is really, you know, the sharing that goes beyond just extracting something from somebody, but actually participating, you know. So photography as a participative process or project. So, which takes me to the work of someone like Trinity Minya, you know, who wrote so powerfully about speaking nearby, you know, and photography as a speaking nearby process in which you're not speaking about, you're not speaking of, you're not pointing a finger at. And I think this is what Akimbi does beautifully in his work, a kind of standing next to you, being with, being together, you know, dismantling a kind of a hierarchy of vision, of the visual, you know, dismantling kind of a hierarchy of the person who has the possibility of shooting and the person who is being shot at. So this is it, you know, so a photography that becomes a sharing, actually a caring, a sharing and a caring, a taking care of, accepting that I see you, you see me, I listen to you, you listen to me, I am there, we acknowledge each other's presence, you know, but not a photographic process that is predatory, you know, that I am the hunter and you are the game. I am the hunter and you are my victim, you're my, and so on and so forth, you know. So how does one create a process in which we are speaking nearby, we're listening nearby, we are working with each other, we're sharing space, you know, a photography of interdependence, you know, and so on and so forth. So these are things that your question or your thoughts actually provoke in me, you know. So it is not a taking away, it is not a consuming, it is not a selling, it is a being with. It's an exercise of being together in the world. You know, how can we imagine photography that actually performs that does that? So these are things I'm interested in. And I think these are things that have framed our conversations in the past months, you know, that have been very enriching to me, with you and the other curators for the Rencontre de la Photographie Africaine, the Bamako Biennial, you know. So these are things we talk about every Friday afternoon, my time, for hours upon hours, you know, and yeah, it's been very enriching.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it has been. Yeah, it's so, yeah, I just come out of those meetings with so much energy. And especially, I think what's interesting, the idea of kind of being with, and that you just touched on as well, is when we come from histories of, and specifically where photography by the colonialists has been of taking, right? Like like that has been an oppressive action. When we have that history, then it means that the act of being with, the act of deep listening, to not take when we use a camera, when Black folks take images, to not reproduce that history. I think that we've had some really amazing conversations with the team in terms of that, in terms of just with the call for submissions, when we're going through some of the artists, sometimes it can be evident that, of course, this is the system that we are all participating in. And so being able to kind of find or to see artists that are able to recognize that they don't want to participate in that kind of consumptive practice, and find ways to be with, and like to learn from their subjects, or to create new worlds that don't instantly kind of either react to the colonial project. And I just would like to state that that's really hard work. It's really hard to not only create work, but then to also be able to reflect on your work and be like, what is happening in here? Like, what am I doing? Am I replicating the forms that have enslaved me, or that have, kept me down? Because I think that it's sticky. It's like there's like a very kind of, there's a web that we kind of all have to pull apart to kind of get to the place of being with. And it's always challenging. I think that just in terms of thinking of it as a stigma, as a mark, is really interesting, because it's maybe in some ways it's just identifying it, like it's being able to name it, name that action.
Liz, you're touching on something extremely important and extremely difficult, so it is not an easy thing to see yourself through other prisms, especially if you've existed within an oppressive context. I think Du Bois writes about that in the Soul of Black Folk, 1903. When he talks about double consciousness, and he writes at some point, it's a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one black body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. It's very difficult, So if we accept that, that the history of photography has produced such images, then one would also say that people have seen themselves through these images, so through this prism of the oppressor. So one of which is a very tough task, is to get yourself out of that, is to negate, is to refuse that prism. Is the possibility, and one possibility is to say, no, I won't put seeing or the visual as the central medium, but I will look for something else, something else that is not as, say, uncoded as, that is Lemma, by the way.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, good.
I'm sorry for bomb.
No worries. She's my boss, by the way. Okay. So to see yourself not through that prism of the oppressor, but actually see yourself through something else, or shift from that vision in general into some other sense of being in the world, which could be the listening, which could be touch, which could be smell, and something else, other senses. So to come back to that, unfortunately, we know a lot of photographers, even African, even indigenous folks, even Asian, and so on and so forth, that have not been able to free themselves from that space, being locked up in that space of double consciousness in which you cannot see yourself or measure yourself beyond the meta of the oppressor, of the person who constructed you as other, So there is something very interesting happening, which has happened for several decades now, that a couple of brilliant photographers have succeeded in doing, flooding that space of photography with images through which they can see themselves, and therein, in that space of narration, so the narrative photograph, in which they use the tales, the stories, through oral history, in which those spaces that have not been co-opted, that have not become toxic yet. And that is what is special in the space of the sonic, because I can hear what they cannot hear. We can listen to the same sound. I can hear what they cannot hear. And there's a lot of strength in that. At the same time, in the space of the proverb as well, I said that in the last conversation we're having, when Chinua Achebe says, proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten, there's an incredible image that comes up my mind. But again, if you haven't eaten palm oil in your egusi, if you haven't eaten palm oil in your eru and fufu, you will never understand it. So that is the space of our knowledge. Those are the spaces of our knowledges. So that is it. So how can photography actually claim such spaces in which that which you see is not what you see? You look, but you do not see, or you see, but you do not look, and so on and so forth. It is in that tension, that, in my opinion, brilliant photography of our time exists.
I think making note of that relationship with the sonic, and the maybe kind of highlighting the material like aspects of photography, which are maybe more kind of appear in a specific hard and fast way, which the sonic doesn't, right? Like there's an immaterial kind of fluidity that we all recognize with the sonic. So it means that there's these undercurrents of code, of different kind of frequencies of language that can really emanate through, and that there's maybe an understanding that does exist in the sonic. So we have that space of the proverb that kind of functions in terms of, that makes me think about translation and the fact that there is this understanding now, I think, that we understand like the relationship with translation, its limitations, and that there's going to be certain elements of language that are not for those who are learning a language as a second or third or fourth language. Like that there are things that we will not be able to kind of completely take. And not to completely like go in a different direction. I think this is actually alongside it, but thinking about the relationship with the sonic and silence and the pause, and how it's interpreted or reflected on the page or in images. I'm brought back to thinking about Norbesi Philip and, you know, her seminal work Zong, and the fact that that is a incredible poem that is full of silences, like profound and painful and moving, very energetic silences. And to be able to do that, I think is really very difficult in terms of with a material form. She wrote just recently on social media, she says about Zong, this simple but profound rule is what gives the text its distinctive shape. There are many reasons that Zong is brilliant, breathtaking. Oh, sorry, that's me saying that. She writes, one important aspect of our craft as poets is precision of placement, precision of words, precision of punctuation, precision in all things. And I think the fact that she uses the term precision, not perfection, but like the fact that every one of her, the placements of words on the text on the page is precise and replicates water, replicates drowning, replicates wind. There's so many elements that I think are so challenging to do in a material form. And so, yeah, I guess I'm very curious to hear you talk about silence and space in relationship to all of this.
You know, it's absolutely beautiful. You know, it's I don't know where to start, but there's this brilliant. Before we come to Nobese, which was you know, of course, one of the most important poets of our time. I was listening to Navin Kishore the other day, you know, in his acceptance speech for the Ottawa Award. And he was talking about the photographic suspense. He was talking about the photographic pause and anticipation in that space of the pause, the suspension, the void. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was incredible. It seemed as if he was doing a prelude to the conversation we're supposed to have, which is what happens in that space of suspension, that space of the limbo. What happens in that space in which of undecidability, as Derrida would call it, you know, where one doesn't know what direction one has to take, you know, which is a very powerful space because it is a space of a kind of a retreat. You're there, but you're not really there. You suspend. You ask for the listener to wait. You even ask for yourself to take some time to breathe, you know, to take a deep breath, to condition your thought and your seeing and your being in the world. That's suspense. Now, this is very important. And I think you said it all. That despite the fluidity, there are moments of stillness. Mm-hmm. You know, in Pidgin, sometimes you say, somebody would ask you the question, how are you? And you would respond or ask you how you day, you say watago leaf stone, which is incredible. How you day, watago leaf stone is the answer. So the water flows, the stone stays.
Mhm.
It is in that pause. It is there. It is a witness to every atom, every molecule that passes through. It is also in motion, but in another pace. And that is interesting. So I, for one, in relation to Nubesi's work on the song, which we can do a whole lecture about, which, again, one of the most brilliant things in that book is also the essay she writes at the end, in which she reflects about how to write about that which cannot be written, to think about that which is unthinkable, which is unbelievable. But again, in the whole thing, to me, it's a sculpture. It is, it's a sculpture of a poem as sculpture. Because what is very important in sculpting is not necessarily what you leave, what you have at the end, but what you decide to leave out. You're right. So you have a piece of wood, a trunk of a tree. The question is, what do I take out? What is that? So it is that. It is what we take out. And I think the precision is also in what we decide to take out, and that is it. Photography is not about what you decide to shoot, it's what you decide not to shoot. What is very easy, recently there was another post, since you're talking about social media, a young scholar, journalist in Germany called Mohammed Amjahid. He wrote a post about a young white guy was going around Berlin photographing or taking pictures of the most dispossessed, homeless people, especially migrants. And he called this guy out. And to me, what I was thinking about is, again, that is too easy to do. Everybody can do that. You can go out there and you take pictures of the most precarious people in society, but that's not the point. The point is what you decide not to shoot, that precision of leaving something out. And to me, that is why I think the song is a sculpture, what Nubesi has crafted, right? And then we can go back into the history of it and so on and so forth, what is taken out, the lives that are taken out, the people that are deprived of their lives, and that intent, that intentionality. There's nothing, as we say in French, par hasard about it. There's nothing, it's very well thought, the dispossession, the deprivation of lives, the disenfranchisement of people and the continuity thereof. So one of the projects we're working on at Savvy, for example, is looking at Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, written in 1972. So next year we'll be doing a 50 years commemoration of that book, And one thing that Rodney so brilliantly writes about is the intent behind the structures of development versus underdeveloped. So the fact that you're underdeveloped, you're called underdeveloped, you're made to become underdeveloped. It's never meant for you to catch up with some notion of development, but it's meant for you to be there, stuck in that space forever, And that is something, so that intent, So how do we work also with precision in what we do? And poetry is an act of precision. The way words find themselves within a particular page is architecture, you know, it is, you know, going back to Henri Lefebvre's notion of rhythm analysis, space, bodies in space, in time, you know, how we find the word in a particular space, in a particular time. That is it. And the song is a masterpiece for that.
Mhm.
Again, which connects us to poetry, right? It's, you know, very much, you know. And today, if you permit me to share this, you know, I was looking at again, thinking about sound and so on and so forth. I was looking at a collection of selected poems by Langston Hughes, and there's this poem titled "Song for Billie Holiday," which I thought, again, in that, you know, thinking of precision, you know, and I'm happy you brought that up, you know, because it's just so much about that. And if you permit me, I'll read it, you know. It's
Please,
a short
please.
poem. It's incredible. It goes, "What can purge my heart of the song and the sadness? What can purge my heart but the song of the sadness? What can purge my heart of the song of the sadness? Do not speak of sorrow with dust in her hair or bits of dust in eyes. A chance wind blows there. The sorrow that I speak of is dusted with despair. Voice of muted trumpet, cold brass in warm air, bitter television blurred by sound that shimmers where?" With a question mark at the end. It's you know, especially the first part of it, you know, that moves from, you know, of the song and the sadness to but the song of the sadness to of the sadness of the song.
Mhm. Precision.
Yes, precision. Moving, as my friend, you know, Tito Valerie would say, you know, moving with intent,
Mhm.
being with intent, actually.
It's also, you know, thinking about ways that we've been categorized, where the structures around us have been there to frame us, right? So, you know, I'm thinking of keeping us in our place, oppressed people. Just so always being kind of in this relationship of dependency. And so I think about the expansive qualities, the expanding outwards that happens within the space of Zong with the precision of Langston Hughes. And I think about how that work, and when you see work that's overt, on its nose, like on the nose, like the photographer you were talking about that was photographing the destitute, that is he is trying to create a frame, a structure, like there is nowhere else to look, like there is nothing else to see, like the surface is really what he's interested in, and that's it, it's shallow. And so I think about so many of the artists that we're speaking about, and that I continue to think about, is that there's these expanding out forms, right? Like their work is not giving you the limitations of one way of understanding work. It's that there's so much more that we now consider, that these spaces are expansive. I think about that, you know, I think about Langston Hughes and also Roy de Carava. I kept, when we were kind of thinking through this talk, I kept coming back to this image of Roy de Careve as Shirley looking down the stairwell from 1952. And it's just this simple black and white photograph of this woman leaning on a banister. And it's just these little, like the lines, like where her dress hits the banister, it's poetry. And it's so simple. Like, I think simplicity is just the most challenging thing to do, I think, as an artist in any form. But it expands out. And I think that's when simplicity is really beautiful, is when it is this expansion, these ways of envisioning worlds, as opposed to being like, here you go, look at this sad story, look at this poor person, like, where we're supposed to just have the whole kit and caboodle all in one.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Liz, thank you so much. Really, now, yes, the space, the simplicity, and the complexity in simplicity. There is much that can be said without making overstatements. There's also much that can be said without doing tautology. And that is the work of Roy de Careve, to me, at least, and actually, Akimbode introduced me to a publication by Roy de Careve and Langston Hughes, The Sweet Flypaper of Life, which is a beautiful, beautiful piece. And I'm very thankful that there was a re-edition of this work, and that I could afford for it because it was sold out. And like for you, this image of Shirley looking down the stairwell is a brilliant piece of simplicity and photographic, I would dare say, excellence. To me, there is this image titled Graduation from 1949 in this publication, and it's an image of a young woman in a dress like a wedding dress. I cannot remember the words that Langston Hughes found for this image, but it's a kind of a parking lot, but desolate, empty. So the space, the silence is screaming. It's incredibly loud silence. It's the space is empty, but it's extremely populated, by history, to say the least. And she's walking down, she's in motion. She looks out there on the wall, and there is this advertisement of a car, in this, and it's so simple, but so complex, It's a culmination of the histories that make her and actually make that craft that space. So, yes, that there is that silence in it that, again, that, you talked about that moment, that pause. But I've never understood photography as, what everybody tries to say, or many people try to say as, a freezing of time and so on and so forth. It's at best a pause, and that continues in a bit. Or if we have to take it as a freezing, then we have to consider the defreezing moment as well. So photography as a motion, as a flux, you know, and that is why for the last edition of the biennial, I chose the title "Streams of Consciousness." You know, thinking of Max Roach's and Abdullah Ibrahim's piece. You know, that flow, that the change of states, but it's in motion. As they say in physics, energy never dies; it moves from one form to the other. So photography is everything but a freezing. At best, it's a short pause, and then it continues. If not physically, but in your mind. As Mutabaruka would say, this poem continues in your mind, in your mind, in your mind, and so on and so forth.
Which, I mean, I think in terms of this talk, I wanted to also talk about like the loop, the sample, the gesture, rhythm, pattern, which is, you just like brought us here naturally, because I think there is this, and also there's just so many overlaps in terms of whether it's photography or the sonic music, where that sense of the gesture, or like the something where we're creating a pattern that there's an element of familiarity. Like I think of like in terms of like these streams or this flow, that there's some element that becomes just familiar enough that we can kind of connect into, that then can be broken or changed. So in terms of, I've been thinking about artists that are doing this. I think that there's some ways. I've recently been working with Timothy Yannick Hunter, who has an incredible website called trueandfunctional.com, where these are like audio visual collages, like sketches that he has broken up into pages that are sides, like album sides. And they function in this way. There's these elements of footage, old footage that he finds. Then he also makes his own samples, his own beats that kind of continue on. So there's these rhythms, these like elements that you're flowing through these images with. And so I've been really trying to think about what does that pattern, like what does pattern do when we hear it, or like when we feel it, because I feel like it's really such an instant call to our bodies to attend to, which is also why I had mentioned to you as well, which I'm a latecomer to Julius Eastman, and I am like a new devotee. I've been listening to him as much as I can possibly, because I feel like in terms of thinking about patterning and having a steady, but also the ability for it to be so expansive at the same time is so profound. So anyways, maybe, yeah, there's maybe a few things.
I mean, it's again, brilliant, because you brought up Julius Eastman and patterning and repetition and the loop and so on and so forth, which are fundamental in his music, right? Which Kofi Agawu writes about or talks about brilliantly in his minimalist tendencies in African music, So, Julius Eastman was an African-American composer, pianist, performer, and so on. We did a huge project on the work of Eastman that had been highly forgotten or erased at Savvy Contemporary, but that's a long story and a story for another time. But, ba-da-da-dum, bam, 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 ba-da-da-dum, bam, 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 ba-da-da-dum, bam, bam, bam. So this repetition, and then another layer comes in, and, over and over again, which is something very, very much fundamental in a lot of our cultures, And it's very interesting because I like the fact that you bring in Yannick Hunter's work, and the kind of samples and, and the excerpts that are cut out, to and the relation between sound and the visual, that he makes. But I wanted to bring in also the work of Eric Jamfi, the Ghanaian artist who worked on Julius Eastman, by the way, and for the last edition of the Bamako Biennial, he did an installation, a wall of photographs of Julius Eastman on different, so repeated several times, over and over again. It's as if it was a kind of a visual translation of Julius Eastman piece, different sizes on that wall, thinking, of his compositions. Eastman once upon a time said he has to accept fully his Blackness, the fact that he's a musician, and the fact that he is a gay man, and so on and so forth. So, and it seems as if Eric Jamfi is thinking about that fullness. So it's crowded of these images of Eastman repeated over and over again, which is fantastic, Now, I'm very much interested in seriality, so when somebody like Akimboda can be photographs, I'm interested in the way he also presents his work, because his favorite medium is the grid, which is a discussion we've had for years. I'm trying to have him break that grid, but you would see for Documenta, for example, in Athens, we had in the conservatoire where his works were presented, he had these huge grids, and the way they repeat each other themselves, I'm thinking about that seriality, which is very much, a sonic element as well, like the chorus, in a song. So you sing, and then something always comes up and so on. But also, as in storytelling, the fact that you start in a particular way, once upon a time, that entry. And I'm thinking again of Toni Morrison's acceptance speech at the when she got the Nobel Prize, where she's thinking about that once upon a time, and the fact that is, an element of seriality, you catch on that, something you can hold on. The way we say in my language, lenkwa, to get people in, so that's a reality, which is other reef, in Congo, for example, they have, in sukus, in Congolese rumba, there's this moment, and the guys of Chimurenga, they have the Pan-African Space Station, they have a session on this, in which the musician, just plays a guitar, a moment, which is a moment of pause, but it's a moment of reflection again. But that it's a repetition, and in which Ntone Ejabe talks about it as a technology, and that technology of repetition is very, like the wave, the way it flows, and repeats itself over and over again, something I find brilliant. It's called the Sembene, or the Sembene, the play. Anyways, yes, just a side note to that.
It's so exciting. I know we're running out of time soon, but I just I think thinking about the seriality, I started kind of just trying to find as much information out as possible on Julius Eastman, and found his music notation. I don't read music notation, but these drawn notes on all of his music. Like the scores are so beautiful. And so when you were talking about Akimbode's grid, I was like, oh, maybe this is his notation.
Oh,
you know, maybe there's just like something that's his language, right? I mean, which we know, yeah.
I mean, I spent years looking at the notations of Julius Eastman. That's actually where the title of the show comes from. We have delivered ourselves from the tonal. It's something he writes in his notations,
Oh my gosh.
Or Buddha, the peace Buddha, which is a circle, which is, in which he's fighting with, in the notation. It's a struggle, to write the music. It's fantastic. And yes, it is a notation to something. I'm currently writing about the work of Teresa Lanceta, who is a brilliant Spanish artist, who works with textiles. And, I've had to write about this work for the past 6 months. I haven't had the time nor whatever. And a few days ago, I was listening to Lester Bowie's album from the early 80s called All the Magic. And it's a double vinyl, brilliant piece. And I just think that these things are connected, that, actually Teresa Lanceta is writing the scores of the music that exists already. So that's why when you put Bode and the notation of Eastman, I find it super interesting. History is always written after the event.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I feel like I think we could probably go on, but I'm wondering if we should take questions or if there are any questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francisco, the director of the gallery at Onsite. And there are not very many questions in the Q&A right now. There's one which I will pose in a moment, and I have one to follow up. So if anyone does have any questions on the large number of ideas and artists and poets and sculptors and everyone that's been mentioned, filmmakers too, please use the Q&A to do that. The first question that we have, though, from the Q&A from one of the attendees is, this is going to be a very short answer possibly. Who was the author mentioned regarding the 3 E's?
Okuyenwenzo.
Okuyenwenzo. Okay, I will type his name into the answer field or you're doing that. Thank you, Bonaventure. Well, maybe I'll go ahead with my question, and then I think Lisa has also a question. My question for you is, as curators, you have a lot of time to sort of delve into these ideas, to make these relationships, to sort of, look at photography as poetry, as sculpture, as so many things. But how do you communicate that to an audience in the context of something like, a biennial or something where people are really filing past? They're looking at hundreds and thousands and millions of images. They're thinking in terms of images. It's kind of like overpowering and almost impossible not to. How do you get them to consider the silence of a photograph or the sound of a photograph as curators? Like, how much, time, space, words do you have to kind of communicate your ideas like that?
Liz, you want to say something?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about that a lot, and especially right now, I think about in relationship to photography, how do we engage? How do we engage different types of people? How do we engage our bodies in space. And that can be really, it can be really challenging, but I think I regularly return to the artists in terms of what is the way that they have been thinking through their work, conversations in terms of how do they envision their work, and how to activate it. I think that it's always, I mean, I think in terms of our meetings, there's a lot of conversations that we're having. I mean, there's always elements too where you're working with limitations in every space and in every gallery, and you know, whatever, you're always going to have certain limitations. So you might not be able to have a 20-foot, you know, projection on a wall, but you have this way that, you know, another form that will work for a space. But I feel like in some ways it's a bit like composing, or working maybe more like conducting, because I think sometimes there's elements where I'm like working with an artist and they have this idea of what they want their work to do, but they haven't figured out how to do that. And so we work together to try to figure out, is this work intimate? Is it like, do we want people to feel something really, you know, intense and close, or is it a big work that like needs to scream at people? So how do we kind of do that in different forms? Bona?
Yeah, you know, actually, I'll give a very simple example. You know, in Bamako, the last edition, in the Palais of Madame Bateba, we had an, you know, huge space. One of the first works you saw when you got into the space was a Malian artist, photographer, that had done a series on the railroads from Bamako to Dakar, from Mali to Senegal. And what most people talked about was the sound. You know, it's no longer active and so on and so forth. What marked the people most was the sound of the train. You know, so it was just that image, right? Okay, another example would be the work of, forgotten her name, Aji, who did the work on the Maggie Cube, on the Maggi, you know, this.
Yeah, I know the work. I can't think of her name either.
Exactly, you know, in which, you know, people were talking about food. And it was very much about this. This is something that is produced by Nestle and used as a spice for in every African country, you know, and it's actually sold to people as, you know, some that you cannot cook without it, you know. So it provoked so many conversations, because people were thinking about food when they saw that image, you know, because in every city, every village on the African continent, you'll find somebody cooking with Maggie Cube, right? So it provoked that. So actually, the mediation is one thing. We can go ahead and tell people everything, but in looking at the photographs, what comes up their mind? Now, if you look at the series, you know, there's this book by Roy de Carava on photographs he took in the jazz clubs, you know. I mean,
the sound I saw. Yeah. The sound I saw.
The sound I saw, fantastic. Thank you very much, Liz. You know, nobody needs to tell you, but the sound just comes up your mind, right? You just by looking at these guys, you just think of music, right? And that is it. And there's this incredible again image by Roy de Carava, which is Edna Smith basses, you know, and it's very simple. It's, you know, you know, it's the woman with a bass, you know, in the hand, and you can listen to the music. That's it. So the mediation. So again, that's why I'm thinking about what photography does as an aesthetic medium, as an activist medium, as a political medium, and so on and so forth. It mediates itself.
Great, thank you. We've got 4 or 5 questions that have come in just in the last couple of minutes. Lisa, did you want to ask your question?
No, I think it's great. Go ahead and ask from them.
Great, thank you. So this question comes from Tong Grace Dorothée. The question is, how or what can we do to free ourselves from that space of photography to show what we have decided not to show? And then she continues, le poète est un architecte.
This is the challenge. This is the ultimate challenge. I feel like I can tell you when I see it or when I see the space, but I don't know how. I don't know how it happens. I that's what I revel in, when I'm meeting with artists, when we work and think through practices of Akimbodes and Roy de Caravas, and is that I don't know what the path is, but I know that they're doing it right.
Okay, do you have an answer, Bona? Shall we move to the next one?
I don't have an answer, but I'll try. The truth about it is that it's a process, right? Nobody really knows, but it's a process of engaging. And again, freeing oneself from certain baggages. I'll answer through the words of Akimbode Akimbi. In the text I wrote about him for the Documenta Daybook, I use a quote, something he said a few years ago, and he says, over the past years, I have realized that I am looking for my childhood. That kind of innocence and childlikeness that I had growing up in London and Lagos, and which I feel is no longer there. Whenever I find such moments, fragments of this lost innocence, I take photographs. At the same time, I try to understand what's happening today in the cities I document. So that is something that it's a way of looking at it, looking for that childlike innocence, freeing oneself from the histories that have been imposed on you in school, unlearning some of those, toxic knowledges that have been superimposed on your being, But I think it's a lifelong struggle. And c'est vrai que la poète est une architecte, it is the case, So, yes, so it is a constant, finding, in search of oneself and one's people and one's space in the world. That's it.
Thank you. This next question comes from Ade Abegunde. Could you expand further on the significance of liminality / liminal spaces in the contexts you have presented?
You go.
Oh my. Okay. I don't know if I understand the question properly, but let's assume that there are liminal spaces. Then, which I've written about that in the past, then those spaces could be spaces in which some people have access and others not. So the question is then, the space that is qualified as liminal is a space in which you might find yourself and others would not find themselves. I once wrote an essay about being in the dark and not being in light. So if you say that space of darkness is a liminal space, there's a beauty and power in it because it's a space in which your eye is accommodated. You can see yourself and you can see the people that are in that space, while others that are in light cannot see you. So that is it. But we could also say that there are no liminal spaces. So the space in which you are is the space, right? It is not, so it's a question of who defines what the space is, what is the center space and what is the liminal space, So yes, so I don't really believe in the thing about the center versus the periphery or the central space versus the liminal space, Hamid Dabashi once wrote about this. He said Mullah Nasruddin was asked the question and he said, where his goat stands is always the center because the goat always eats around that space. So every space we are in is our center, So if you choose to be in a liminal space, that's fine, but it shouldn't be a space in which others have put you, right? So that is it. Otherwise, we're going back to that double consciousness in which you're seeing yourself just through the prism of that other.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks. Okay, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry. I've thought a lot about liminality. I think really doing my grad work, I was thinking a lot about it through the exhibition that I presented, The Break, the Wake, the Hold, the Breath, which was a 2-person show with Abraham Ogobase and Jamila Malika Abubakar. And I think a lot of what I was considering and contending with was also just expressions of the fact that I'm biracial, Black, African, Nigerian, grew up in Saskatchewan, and felt like I lived through all of these different experiences, which felt like a liminal space that I inhabited. And then realizing that for everyone, we all live these liminal experiences of an in-betweenness between whatever our experiences are. I shouldn't say everyone. I think that there's just different forms of understanding that. And so I think that through the exhibition with Abraham and Jamila, I was really looking at the relationship with liminality and fugitivity and the physical, well, the photographed and the sonic qualities of representing a fugitive aspect of being held in a liminal space. And I think that is a real depiction of kind of Blackness, of living in the diaspora. There's a sense of that, but I think that exists, I think, more now. I'm thinking through ideas of both and that we are all living in these kinds of liminal experiences. And so it's really, as Bona said, as opposed to thinking about how we inhabit a marginal kind of area, it's how are we anchoring, how are we seeing what our experiences are as the center, and also understanding that there are centers that overlap and that are very different and that exist everywhere. So,
if I may add something to that, Abdiazo Nascimento, the Brazilian artist, scholar, theater maker, and so on, he wrote a book called O Quilombismo. And one of the things that I took with me in this was his conceptualization of the quilombos in Brazil. So the maroon space, the space of maroonage, where the people who freed themselves from enslavement created such spaces. He actually, conceived of such spaces as the first democratic spaces in that space called Brazil, right? So everything beyond that. So actually, if there's anything like a democracy in Brazil today, it should be thankful to the quilombos, to that space in which the people fled and went and created. So it's by no count liminal, in my opinion. It is, so to say, the center and the future and, you know, a space of humanity and so on and so forth. Every other thing, although it was bigger and so on, was actually liminal. The plantation was a liminal space. That space of the Quilombo, in which the people had freed themselves and went to, was actually everything other than liminal, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our appointed time. There very sadly are a few unanswered and very thoughtful questions that we won't have time to address right now. But I just wanted to.
One more, Francisco.
Pardon? What's that?
One more question.
One more question? Okay. Sure. Let's see. Let's go to Nicola Feldman Kiss, who's a locally based artist that you may know, has asked, could you please muse a little on, quote, double consciousness in the context of mixed race body consciousness of complex diaspora identities that physically incorporate the other, and in which historical oppressed and oppressors live through us?
Oh, just an easy one.
Yeah. Should I read it again, or you want to take a stab?
Oh no, that's a big one. I mean, I think this is a really interesting question in terms of I have many related relations with Nicola in terms of understanding a diasporic identity and being of the other and being of white lineage as well. So I just don't know. I mean, I think I've like I said, I think I've really inhabited a liminal space for so long, but I really think that there's I think in terms of the idea of double consciousness, I think the more that I recognize it, the way I'm able to understand my relationship to dominant culture, the less I'm acting out of that place, I guess. And so I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily feel like it's such a precarious place that I'm coming from as I previously was. So, which is that transition to understanding myself as a center, as opposed to a liminal site that feels fragile. That's the.
Thank you. That actually clarified the question a little bit for me too.
Thank you, Liz. You know, I think the only way I can answer that question is by asking Nicholas to read a short article that Caroline Randall Williams wrote in the New York Times, I think it was last year, you know, during the whole debate of tearing down Confederate monuments and so on. She wrote an essay called, an opinion piece called, "You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument." And the subtitle was, "The Black people I come from were owned and raped by the white people I come from. Who dares to tell me to celebrate them?" You know, so she takes some time to think about that. You know, of course, not all the cases are rape, but to think about what it means to live in two cultures, in multiple cultures, and so on and so forth, you know. So that is one possibility. The other possibility is to say that we've always belonged to several worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Question is not belonging to several worlds, but it is the fact that one of those several worlds dominates the other, you know, dehumanizes the other, takes away the possibility of the other of breathing, you know, so that is it. just to exist in several worlds is not a problem. You know, Glissant actually talks about that in this interview with Mantia Jawara, where he talks about, where he's asked about the diaspora, and Glissant says, it is the consent not to be a single being, which is basically at the core of what Lisa and I and the other curators are working on for the coming Bamako Biennial, accepting that we've never been single beings. It's not limited to the fact that one belongs to, it's mixed race, white, black, and so on and so forth. We've always been multiple beings, in Francisco, in Lisa, in Saida, in Liz, in Nicholas, in every of us are multiple beings, so we have to embrace them. We have to, especially free ourselves, deliver ourselves from this notion of the singular supremacist structure, right? And that is it. And if you embrace that, that's fine.
Great, wonderful. Well, with that, I will thank you both very, very much. It's always wonderful hearing two such deep thinkers helping us to understand their point of view and how they see the world and the art world in particular. You're both so dynamic and articulate that I've learned a lot, and I wasn't really sure what to expect, frankly, today. And it's been super interesting. And so I thank you both so much once again for your time. And I'd like to thank all of our attendees for being with us today. I would like to remind you that On-Site Gallery recently reopened, and we are showing the exhibition Survival Architecture and the Art of Resilience, a wonderful exhibition looking at how designers and architects and artists have responded to emergency situations in order to create emergency shelters and other ways of cheaply and quickly saving lives in catastrophic situations. The show, we ask people to make an advanced booking in order to visit, even though our admission is free. And you can do that very easily at ocadu.ca/onsite. Thank you all, everyone, again, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. If you, this has been recorded and will be available on YouTube on the On-Site Gallery channel very soon.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Lisa.
you. Good to see you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Emily. And
Thank
Saida.
you, Bona. Bye.
Oops, I'm off.